was recently talking with a new client of mine and her fiance. And as I was reviewing their planning, I discovered that they hadn't actually started talking about estate planning. Now, this is not an uncommon thing that I find because what I find is a lot of people, no one wants to talk about a time when they're not there. But the reality is we all need to do some financial planning and some estate planning. So I invited today's guest to come on the podcast and talk about estate planning in 2022. Is your family protected? I'm Felicia Gopaul, wealth coach for professional, educated, and successful women and your personal wealth builder. Welcome to the Her Money Story podcast. Keep listening to hear more about today's guest as she'll be sharing with you the tools that you need with your estate planning, the situations that you need it, and whether or not you are protected going forward. So who's my guest? My guest is Portia Wood of Financial Group, LLP. She's a founding partner and have an African-American their daughter estate planning team here in California, Los Angeles in particular, or Pasadena in particular, who is focused on making sure that you all have the tools that you need at your disposal to close the information gap that keeps families from leveraging and protecting their assets to create generational wealth. They serve families with they serve all sorts of different families with special attention to the unique needs of Black, Brown, and LGBTQ families. Portia, welcome.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Felicia. It's such a pleasure to be here with you on Her Money Story podcast. So thank you for having me.
Oh,
it's always such a long introduction, right? It's like, who are we? What do we do? We're generational wealth planning attorneys, right? We help people protect what they're building and what they go to work for every day. So their home, their bank account, their stuff, so that it gets to the people they want to have it, people or institutions. Some people say, I want to donate to my alma mater. Some people want to give it for their kids. What almost everybody can agree on is they don't want to see it dissipated by a court. So
no, nobody does. So let me ask you, and looking through the lens of, I just sat down with an engaged couple, what should they be considering in 2022 with regard to estate planning?
Everything, right? Right now they're engaged. They don't have a legal right to each other's assets. If something were to happen to them, to one of them before they say I do, the assets that they've accumulated are their separate property. They are not each other's beneficiaries. And so they may own a house together and they're not legally married. It's not community property. Something happens to one of them. Now that fiance owns that home with the other fiance's family, whether they had kids or their parents are still alive or someone else, and they may end up losing that asset because of a forced sale or something else because there was no plan in place. People don't think about that because we often don't think that we're going to die or that we're in danger of dying. Another thing they're going to want to think about, especially as people are waiting longer to get married, they tend to come to the table with a lot of assets already, whether that be a 401k or a retirement account or a brokerage account, or maybe their own home already. They come to the table with assets that they've accumulated. And so oftentimes we also suggest that they may want to consider a prenuptial agreement to protect those assets. People don't often think of that as estate planning, right? They're like, oh, that's, sort of divorce planning or for people who are really rich. But when you do your estate plan, if you have a prenuptial agreement in place that says these are my separate assets, your estate plan will dictate where they go. And you can say things like, I want my spouse to be able to use them for life. But after that, I really built these assets to take care of my family, not my spouse's family after I'm gone if we don't have kids. And if we have kids, I've really built this for my kids, for their future. So I want my spouse to always be able to use it during their lifetime, but I don't want a new spouse that they decide to marry after I'm gone, getting the fruits of my labor. And so it's important to set up a structure that outlines that. And when you're at the very beginning, it's the easiest time to do it because it just keeps it clean. It gets a little bit murkier as you try to do it later on in life. So for a newly engaged couple, depending on where they are in their lives, a prenuptial agreement might be one of the first conversations, as well as setting up what they would want. Would you want your fiance, if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, to be able to stay in the home, or would you want them to have the benefits of your labor, or would you want it to go someplace else? And that's really a specific conversation to each family, but that's what we would be talking about.
Well, that's a sticky conversation, prenup, because there's so much emotion tied to the concept of prenuptial agreements. So I can see that that could be a problem, but I'm going to move on from there because I don't want to get bogged down in that conversation.
Well, let me say this really quickly, though, Felicia. The prenuptial agreements are actually rising in popularity. And oftentimes they were presented as like, there's a wealthy man and a gold digging woman. And that's kind of the perception that's come about. And I would challenge people with those narratives. We hear that in the media, but that doesn't mean that it's true. The average person goes to work every day and has a bank account and has stuff that they are building and that their labor is going towards. And if they have, kids from a previous marriage, which is common nowadays, or they have other things, the way the laws work don't protect those unique circumstances. And so we have to make sure that individuals are protecting themselves. And it's not about, I don't want you to have my money, or I think you're trying to take my money. It's more about how do we make sure all of our wishes are honored and the people that we love are cared for.
I love that. How are my wishes honored and so that the people that I love are cared for? I think that's a different way to frame that conversation, and one that is more empowering and less
judgmental. Just a little bit. But think about it. The same problem is in trust and estates, right? We have this perception in our mind that trust fund kids are these spoiled brats who don't have to do anything, that are just out here living above the rules, and like white kids that just, and everyone's like, oh, I don't have that kind of money. And oh God, I don't want that to be my kids. Of course I don't want to do this. And it's like, well, no, that's how it's been presented. But essentially what a trust fund kid is someone whose parents or grandparents planned for them. They said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a structure to protect what I've built to create a foundation for you. And you can be as specific or as general as you want, but your trust aligns with your values. And so if you say, I want to provide a baseline, I want to make sure health, education, maintenance, security is covered, that you're always going to have food in your fridge, you're always going to have a roof over your head, you'll have a car, but maybe not the nicest car, but you'll have the basics, right? And if you go out and you try to create that business and you fail, you at least know that you're only going to fail so far. You're not going to be in the street, you're not going to be homeless, because that's what stops people in our community. There's a lot of times where we don't have it, and so good talent and ideas get stuck because of responsibilities, because there's no safety net. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? But we have to reframe the conversation and realize that what the media perception has been is not the reality. And the reality is that trust can be for everyone, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Excellent. So the concerns, is it fair to say that the concerns that a single person has versus a married person versus the LBG, I can't do it. There's all those initials. I don't know what my problem is with all those initials, but LGBTQ families, are they all the same, or are they distinctly different?
The concerns of every family is different.
Okay.
Regardless of sort of race or construction or, LGBTQIA or, Black families, Latino families. Yes, they are different across those groups, but they're also different within those groups. If you are a single person who has no children, then figuring out who is going to inherit what you've built is a little bit more complicated. It's very straightforward for people often when they have kids. They say, I just want it to go to my kids. But if you don't have kids, you have to get more thoughtful about where it goes, because it still goes somewhere, right? It's still going to go to someone or somebody's. And if you don't say where that is, then there's a whole court process that happens in the middle. which then means what you got up and worked for every day is now pieces of it are getting ripped out and going to attorneys over here and the court fees over there and publication fees over there. And all of this stuff that is what you built is being ripped apart because you didn't say where it goes. So that consideration is different because you got to figure out who that is. Sometimes people do charity, some people do their parents, some people do their godchildren, some people do a combination of all of that. But that consideration is a little bit different than, say, a parent of kids. But a parent of minor kids is going to have a different conversation than a parent of adult kids, right? Because you have to plan for guardianship. Who takes care of them if something happens to you? We don't like to think about that, but the United States ranks 4th in the world for orphan children as a result of COVID-19, 4th behind Brazil, Mexico, and India. They're the only first world nation in that top 5 for orphan children. In fact, 146,000 plus children were orphaned between April 2020 and June of 2021 in this country, and 65% of them were in minority communities.
Wow.
We have to plan for our kids, especially when you have minors, because what happens to their opportunities if we didn't make a plan for them? We are putting them into a court process that will then continue until they are 18 and beyond. What resources, regardless of how limited they might seem, if they go 100% to your kid versus in pieces, it's going to be far more beneficial for them. And so that conversation is different. If you have adult children, are they married? Might they get divorced down the road? Do they have kids? Again, conversation is different. Are you in a blended family? Blended families have really unique concerns because they're not typically thought of under the law. So yours, mine, and ours, how do we divide that up in a way that's fair and equitable? You have to think about it on the front end. You can't sort of let the law figure it out on the back end because it won't. And there are a lot of kids who their biological parent died. The step parent who was still their parent, right, by love, inherited everything under a community property state. And then when that parent died, they had no biological kids. They just assumed, oh, it's going to go to our kid. But it doesn't. They don't have any biological kids. Now they're looking to see if their parents are still alive or are their siblings still alive. And now this family home that should have gone to this child, which was the intention, has now gone to people that this person may not have even talked to. And the kid got nothing, all because of how the legal structure works when you're in a blended family. And so those considerations are different. Estate planning is not a one size fits all. There are general concepts that come into play, but everybody's unique circumstances are different, and they should be cared for that way.
So let me just kind of have you step back for a minute. And I understand the complexity. I understand that every situation is different, but my thinking is that there are some commonalities. There's some stuff you got to do. So talk to us a little bit about what is the stuff everybody's got to do, no matter what type of family you are and whatever circumstances you might have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my favorite thing to say is there are 3 things that everybody needs inside of their estate plan when they are over the age of 18. The first is to be a property power of attorney, which may be called something different in different jurisdictions. And so it might be a durable power of attorney or a uniform statutory, but essentially it is a document that allows you to grant someone else the power to access your bank accounts, to make decisions on your behalf, to file lawsuits on your behalf, to sell your properties if necessary, if you are not able to. So you get into a car accident, you have a stroke, which unfortunately is on the rise, particularly in Black and brown communities at younger ages. You have a heart attack, something that deems you temporarily incapacitated, where you can't handle your own affairs. That property power of attorney would then activate or step up to be able to care for you without the need of a court interference. Yep. That's going to be the same regardless of how much money you have, whether you have kids, whether you are married, because people wrongfully believe that their spouse is automatically that person for them. And it's not true. If you're over the age of 18, you need to designate for yourself. So the second piece that's going to come in that everybody needs, regardless of any of the differences, right? As long as you're over 18 or an emancipated minor, is going to be your healthcare directives. Who makes your medical decisions if you can't make them for yourself? Who has the right to tell the doctors to pull the plug? So your advanced healthcare directives. What do I want you to do if I'm in this situation? And finally, who has access to your medical records? So your HIPAA authorization forms. Who can access my medical records? That you want to give your agent access because you want them to make informed decisions about your care. Yeah. If you don't have that, then you go through what's called, or those first two, you go through what's called a conservatorship or a guardianship proceeding, depending on what state you're in. And famously, right, the most famous that we've seen so far was Britney Spears. Everybody knows about Britney Spears, right? She had a Netflix special. There were protests all over the place because she had a mental breakdown and she was deemed incapacitated to care for herself. And her father was then put in place for her conservatorship. And if we look at how that worked, right, it was over not just her finances, but her ability to get married, her ability to have children, her ability to work. Was none of those decisions were hers anymore. They belonged to her father. And we have seen this fight that she has had to get that changed for years, right? The whole Free Britney movement. Once you are in, it is incredibly difficult to get out. And the amount of power that person can have over you, you want to make sure you're picking that person for yourself. You don't want the court deciding when you can't have any input because you're incapacitated, deciding for you who's going to be able to make those kinds of decisions. So it's really important to have those first two documents. I don't care what else is going on. It's incredibly important. The third piece is a distribution plan. And this is where you see the variety. When we're talking about variety in family circumstances, this is the place where that variety exists. Your distribution plan may be a simple will, right? You might not have that much, and that much is like really not that much. Like maybe you have $1,000, no minor kids, no property. Okay, maybe a will's going to work out for you, right? But it also can include a trust. It also can include multiple trusts. It might include trusts and businesses. And it's really going to depend, again, on three things. Your family structure. Are you married? Are you single? Are you in a domestic partnership? Minor kids, adult kids, special needs kids, or beneficiaries, all of those things, right? So your family structure, your asset levels, how much money do you have? What do you have, right? Do you own a home? Do you have a car? Do you have life insurance? What do you have? And what's going to be the best way to protect it? And then the third part is your goals. What are you trying to achieve? Because if you don't know where you're trying to get to, you won't get there. So understanding what you want, right? And I find that most people, because of a lack of education, have never thought about what they want because they don't know what's possible. And so we switch back to our defaults, which is what we've seen in the media about these perceptions. We go, oh, okay, we just need a will. And it's all going to work out somehow, right? It's all going to work out. We really do need to expand our ideas about what is possible, because then we can really craft a plan that's going to work. So yeah, that's what everybody needs, regardless of how much money they have, is going to be their powers of attorney for property, their healthcare directives, and some form of a distribution plan. And then that's the part that's going to differ for them.
Okay. So one of the things that you wrote about when we were starting to have our conversation is you're about normalizing the idea that Black, Brown, and LGBTQ families using trust to build generational wealth. Tell me more about that. What does that mean in plain English?
In plain English, right? Stop the lawyer speak. So, I'm the founder of the Black Trust Fund Kids Club on Clubhouse. We're also on TikTok, and we are spreading a lot of information. Our goal through those platforms are to really normalize the idea of intergenerational wealth transfer. Right now, we are failing. We are failing miserably at that. And when I say failing miserably, I mean there was a study that was done in 2017 that said by 2053, the median net worth for Black families was going to hit zero. And that 20 years from now, 2073, Latinx families were going to hit that same result. And if nothing changed, right? And that's what came out. There was a second study that was done in 2017 that found only 13% of college-educated African Americans passed $10,000 or more to the next generation. Only 13%. So if we, take that in reverse, right? 87% of college-educated African Americans weren't even passing $10,000 to the next generation. We're passing negative wealth.
Wow.
And so when people are out here flossing on Instagram and they've got their cars and their bling and their stuff, right? The reality is that it's not transferring, which means each generation is then starting over from zero. And we have the idea that that's not how we're supposed to grow. Generational wealth is not just the wealth inside of your generation. It's what continues to grow and the people who continue to eat the fruit of your labor and sit in your garden that you planted and you tilled generations beyond you. People you've never met are still eating off the fruits that you planted. Yeah. So we have to normalize what that looks like. And you can't do it with a will. You know, a will often is passing it to the next generation for them to sort of figure out what they should do with this. You know, multi-generational trust-based planning allows us to put in some protections on what we pass. We live in a stable economy, right, Felicia? You know, we live in a stable economy. Yeah. Fortunately, at least right for now, we live in a stable economy. So what we know about money in a stable economy is that if you participate in the market and you protect it so that it doesn't get squandered, doesn't get, you know, caught up in divorce proceedings and all this other stuff, as long as you let it sit, it will grow. Guaranteed. Over time. Compounding interest, it will grow. And so if you set up trust-based structures that protect that principle, that whatever you've put in, you can say, all right, you guys live off the interest. That principle will always stay here. You'll get a certain portion of the interest that comes out every year or every quarter or every, you know, whatever. And you've created a baseline. Mm-hmm. People still have to work. They're not trust fund kids. They're not sitting at home doing nothing. Like they still have to do stuff. But at least they have a consistent foundation. And because you've protected that principle, it sits there and continues to grow, right? We don't use that. In fact, 70% of African Americans have no estate planning at all, 70%. So we are just letting it sort of fly by the seat of our pants into the wind. And we are trying to change that. And what we find is that mostly it's education. Mostly it's people didn't know that they could. And as soon as they do know that they can, they're like, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do. I don't go to work every day to like throw my money away. Right. We also found that unrestricted inheritances are typically squandered in about 3 to 5 years of receipt in our community. And that doesn't matter how much they are. There's a lack of financial literacy. There is the issue of, you know, giving out resources to someone in a grieving period, you know, because we all know the 7 stages of grief, right? And so you see people who will go out and spend money to try to make themselves feel happy, regardless of how much it is, right? The more the money, the larger the expenditures. And then they'll wake up and look and they'll have nothing left. And then, you know, they get this buyer's remorse because it didn't fill the void of the loss of the person that they loved. So we've got to take all of these different pieces into consideration when we're setting up our estate plan. That's why it gets so specific. We also have unique challenges in the African American community that are not the same for other communities. There was an entire war on drugs that incarcerated, you know, some studies say 1 in 3 African American males in this country were pegged with some form of the incarceral system, whether it be parole, probation, pending trial, or incarcerated. And that affects inheritances. They don't lose their right to inherit in most cases just because they're incarcerated or on probation or parole. But what was the impact of that to their lives? Well, they've been removed from the job market. They've been removed from their community. If they had kids, they likely have a period of time in which they now have back child support that's owed. And it's really hard to get out of that cycle once you're in it. And so that continues to accrue at an interest rate that is insane. But if they receive an inheritance of 1/3 of a house from their parents, guess what? The state's going to put a judgment on it. They're going to put a lien on their portion to recoup the money. Well, if there's no cash and the other siblings maybe can't pay off that debt, guess what? That's a forced sale of your house, which is can be a cash cow if properly leveraged. And so we have to take into consideration the specifics that are happening inside of a family, because one thing like that can derail someone's lifetime of work. And, you know, it's just the reality. Another thing is a lot of people are receiving government services, whether that be social SSI, disability, and we need to make sure that we are also specifically planning for them. They can't receive directly. They have to receive in something called the Special Needs Trust, or they could lose all their benefits. And if they lose the benefits, have we just bankrupted them? Because I'm sure what's being left is not enough to care for them for life.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting that you should say that in particular. That was one of the things that we really learned when my father passed away in 2020 is my brother has a special needs son. And luckily he has a special needs trust, but, you know, when we looked at the impact of my father's planning and the subsequent my mother's planning, my mother was planning on leaving money directly to this special needs trust. And my brother was like, oh, no, 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 don't do that. That will cause all sorts of other kinds of problems. So it's important that you understand the rules and the regulations of how it goes. And I think we could probably spend a lot of time on this. And unfortunately, we're coming close to the end. But I want to step back and this is a question that I ask all the people who come on as a guest, is I talk a lot about financial freedom. And I think that estate planning is part of getting somebody ready for financial freedom. But what does financial freedom mean to you, Portia?
So I would say financial freedom is the ability to not have to trade your time for money. Right. It's the ability to make choices about that. And estate planning, I would say, is not for the person who's doing the estate plan. Right. The incapacity part is because you're alive, but what you're planning for is what your legacy is after you're gone. And it's for the people who are left behind. So you don't get financial freedom by doing an estate plan. It's just not how that works. What you're trying to create is financial freedom for the people who come after you so that you can leverage what you've done for their benefit. And if you do have parents or grandparents who are still alive, try to get them to do estate planning because they can then help you. And that's how it works, is that it comes from the people before you. But that's what I would say financial freedom is being able to not have to trade your time for money.
Absolutely. I'm in full agreement for that. So let me just kind of come up to my second to final question, which is there a song that is the Portia anthem for where you are financially or the path that you've kind of walked? I just think it's interesting because I'm somebody who loves music. And I just think that, sometimes when I listen to a particular song, it has me, put my shoulders back, and puts me in a particular mood. So let me just ask you: is there a Portia anthem for, where you are financially or the financial journey that you have taken?
Ooh, one of the songs that is probably on repeat in my morning is "I Am Woman" by Emmy Melly. I think that's a really great way to start my day and just a reminder, affirmation of just how strong and powerful we all are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if listeners of the Her Money Story podcast want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you're up to next, where would you direct them?
So I would definitely say our website. We have a ton of free resources. In fact, we have a resource library that we can share the link with below, I think. But it's just woodlegalgroup.com/resource library. There are tons and tons of information to really get you started on this journey. We also have webinars, and I have strategy meetings with people. So if you just want to sit down and really outline what your family might need and what that might look like, strategy session is a really great way to get started.
Absolutely. Perfect. So, Portia, it has been wonderful talking with you. I think that, this is something that I talk to my clients about all the time. But I think the way that you couched it in the three things that everybody's got to have is a different way for people to think about it. I know that oftentimes Black, brown, just families in general often are concerned about the cost of it, but I think that you outline the cost to the family of it. And I think that if you think about it through that lens rather than the dollars and cents of it, then it can make it much easier. So I'm with you for changing the statistics so that more of our communities have the appropriate documentation in place so that they can transfer the wealth that they have spent a lifetime building and move it to the next generation. And I love the fact that you have a clubhouse that's called Black Trust Fund Kids. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
I love that. I'm going to have to step in and listen in from a time to two. So thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure and my honor. This is truly what I enjoy to do, is to share what I know with as many people as possible. So thank you so much for having me.
Was that a fantastic interview with Portia Wood? I think I learned a number of things. She talked about the three things that you've got to make sure that every financial plan has. Was that a fantastic interview with Portia Wood? I think I learned a number of things. She talked about the three things that you've got to make sure that every financial plan has: some planning for the finances, some planning for medical, and having a distribution plan. I think if you think about estate planning inside of that, I think that you will be more likely to be in the category of people who have put together and done some estate planning, rather than in the category. And I believe the statistics were rather astounding. She said 83% of us have not done anything with their estate planning. So let's move more of us into the category of people who have done some estate planning, and keep coming back to listen to the next episode of the Her Money Story podcast. Bye for now.